Hello, friends. This is Carl from the Fellowship League, Facts, Cross, and Discourse, where all of the facts of life and reality all find their foundation and center in the cross and the person of Jesus Christ, via discourse and discussion. You can follow us in our Facebook page in the Fellowship League. You can like it and follow it. And you can also subscribe to our channel, the Fellowship League, same name, and click the bell button to subscribe for more videos. And stay tuned for this episode because we're back for another special Q&A session. And the episode will be on confronting Christianity in the 21st century. And without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful guest today. Her name is Dr. Rebecca McLaughlin. She grew up in the UK and she holds a Ph.D. in English literature from Cambridge University and a theology degree from Oak Hill College in London. She's also co-founder of Vocable Communications, which is a speech-focused, data-driven communications firm dedicated to helping leaders deliver messages that change minds. She's also the author of the famous book, Confronting Christianity, 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion, which we'll be discussing today. And she just finished 2 books, which will be released in March and April. The first book is 10 Questions Every Teen Should Ask and Answer about Christianity, which is a junior version of Confronting Christianity, which will be released in March. And the second book, which is The Secular Creed, Engaging 5 Contemporary Claims, which will be released in April. And by the way, the Confronting Christianity book, you can buy it in Amazon and in Crossway. All right, so it's good to have you here, Dr. Rebecca.
Thank you. It's great to virtually be here.
Yeah, so let's get right to the question. So for our netizens who are watching right now and who don't know the book, Confronting Christianity, which we highly recommend to them, because I'm sure right now the viewers right now should be asking the question, what are they really living for? What are they really dying for? So the first question here is, what prompted you to write the book? What had been your objective and determination of producing such great work? I mean, was this out of a conviction, and how did you compose this kind of writing?
Two main reasons. First is that I grew up in the UK and in a world compared to where I am in America now, where people see Christianity as less believable, to be honest. And so I went to quite academic high school and then to a university where most of my friends were not followers of Jesus, and honestly would have really good reasons for not following Jesus. Lots of ways in which they would think that Christianity wasn't believable and also wasn't even desirable to believe, ways in which morally they didn't think that Christianity was right. And so I spent a long time just talking with friends as someone who myself was following Jesus and wanted others to hear about him. I had a lot of conversations with friends. And I think sometimes people who've grown up maybe in more Christian environments where they haven't known many people who are very clever, very kind, thoughtful people who are not following Jesus. And so it can be easy to think, well, anyone who doesn't follow Jesus or somebody maybe who even identifies as an atheist is probably a really bad or stupid person. And I have many friends who would say that they don't believe in God and who are really thoughtful, intelligent people. And so I wanted to write a book that would help people like them to think about Christianity and why I actually think it is the most believable way of looking at the world. And the other thing was I had a real privilege for 9 years after I moved from the UK to America of working with Christian professors at top secular universities, both across America, but also in other parts of the world. And after 9 years of talking with these people who were experts in everything from physics to philosophy to psychology to history, I realized that there were a lot of things that they knew and that now I knew because I'd talked to them, that most Christians in the world didn't know and didn't have access to the way that they were thinking. And even that many students, for example, would go to university and maybe take a course in psychology of religion or in history or in philosophy, and they might take it from a professor who thinks that this field has disproved or discredited Christianity. And I knew that actually some of the world leaders in that exact same field are serious followers of Jesus. So I wrote the book to try and kind of bridge that gap, or the sort of informational gap between what some of the top Christian thinkers in the world know and what the rest of us have access to.
Yeah, actually, I finished reading your book around last year, and I was fascinated by your literary writing and how you balance literature with intellectual facts and also storytelling. And it really shows that, Christians tend to be so emotional and intellectual in one side, not balancing both ways. Because I'm currently taking up history in our university, and they're reading things that I still yet to know. And I agree with you. We should be listeners and we should know how to engage in the culture. Even though we disagree on many things, we should be willing to. And I'm really grateful for the book. Actually, it motivated me even more to uh, to to dig deeper into the Christian faith. And that's what you said, that Christianity is such a unique belief system that we ought to even put colors into it. Now, moving to the just one chapter in your book, Rebecca, that fascinates me because you cited Antonia Bloomberg, who wrote an article in HuffPost, who said that China will be the Christian majority country. And looking at right now in the particularly now in this year, we're still struggling with the pandemic, and lot of Christians are also leaving the faith. So, looking at the economic and political woes and struggles right now, how can we find the echoes of such prediction in this current situation with the church today?
Yeah, great question. Just to give a little bit of historical context, if we time-zapped ourselves back about 40 years, pretty much every sociologist of religion, every person who was sort of studying religion across the world, agreed that as the world became more modern and as different parts of the globe modernized, as people became more educated, more scientific across the world, that religious belief would naturally decline. And the reason they thought this is because in Western Europe, where I come from, modernization did bring secularization. As people became more modern and more educated, they on average became less likely to be actively religious. And so they kind of assumed, what Western Europe does, the rest of the world follows, right? Turns out that was a very poor way of thinking, and one that we probably should have known was a poor way of thinking. Because in the last 40 years, religious belief globally hasn't declined, despite modernization, despite people becoming more educated, more scientific, it hasn't declined. And in fact, as we look forward to the next 40 years, sociologists now predict an increasingly religious world. So at the moment, Christianity is the largest belief system in the world, with about 31% of the world identifying as Christian. And that proportion is set to increase a little bit to about 32% by 2060. Now, Christianity is also the most diverse belief system, by the way. It is sort of even spread across different parts of the globe, actually, which is one of the ways in which it's distinguished from other religious beliefs. The second largest belief system in the world is Islam, and the proportion of Muslims is expected to increase significantly from about 24% to about 31%, making it a very close competitor with Christianity. Hinduism and Buddhism are both expected to decline slightly in that time period. And the proportion of people who don't identify as with any of the major religious traditions, including people who would say they were atheists, agnostics, or just some to say none, as in they wouldn't check a box to say I'm Christian or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist, whatever. That proportion of people is expected to decline from about 16% to about 13%. Now, when I was growing up, that would have been completely shocking news, because people thought, of course, in the next generation, in the next couple of generations, Christianity will decline and non-belief in any kind of God will increase. And in fact, the opposite is expected. So why is that? Well, one of the most interesting places, as you were referencing, Carl, is that in China, today, China is the global center of atheism, with atheism being the sort of official belief system of the Chinese government, etc. The church in China is growing so fast that experts think that there'll be more Christians in China than in America by 2025. Obviously, China has a much larger population, but still, we've had the largest number of Christians of any country by 2025. And some leading experts think that actually the continued growth of the church in China will mean that by about 2060, there could be more Christians in China than anything else. It could be a slightly majority Christian country. Now, if that happens, obviously that would change all sorts of things, globally, economically, sort of politically. At the same time, experts think that by 2060, about 40% of the world's Christians will be living in sub-Saharan Africa. So this idea that people sometimes have that Christianity is essentially a sort of white Western religion, which it wasn't from the first, is increasingly, it just doesn't line up with the facts today, actually. If we look at the global church, if we look at the scriptures themselves, it doesn't make any sense. But if we look today as well at the global church, the idea that Christianity is essentially a white Western religion is just against the reality of the global church. In fact, Christianity is the greatest sort of multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic movement in all of history.
Yes, that's shocking news. I mean, to clarify, 2025, right? You said that China will be Christian majority in 2060.
No, but by 2025, there'll be more Christians in China than in the US.
Than in the US.
By 2060, who knows, right? But some of the top experts suggest that looking at the way that the church has been growing, that they think that by 2060, China could be majority Christian. So this is, take another 40 years, but that's what could be the case in 40 years' time.
It's quite a contrarian view because, like we view China as a communist country. And it's dominantly communist, and but actually it's not. It's capitalist. That's right. That's a really different view there. But yeah, it seems that the one that's causing the multiplication of the church is the persecution they've been experiencing. Like it's not only in China. I believe you would also consider Christians in the Middle East. I believe they're also growing as well, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and persecution, of course. None of us want persecution as Christians for our brothers and sisters, right? This is not something that we desire. And there have been, sometimes in history, there have been times when persecution has effectively stamped out a church. For example, in the history of Japan, very strong persecution of Christians at one point that had a major impact on stamping out the church there. Not completely stamping it out, but certainly pushing it right down. Having said that, I think sometimes, my fellow Christians in America are desperately afraid of persecution, as if the worst thing that could possibly happen to Christians is that they could have government opposition. Actually, I don't think that's the worst thing that can happen to Christians, because as we see today in the global church and as we see in the scriptures, actually authentic Christianity stands up against persecution. And in many ways, feeling very comfortable in your culture can be worse for the church, because you can end up with a kind of cultural Christianity where people, it's easy to be a Christian, everyone is a Christian, and so it can end up not really meaning anything. And Jesus, of course, calls us to, he says, if anyone wants to follow him, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow him. So it's a call to self-sacrifice. It's not a call to convert.
Going back to what you said about Christianity being a white American religion, I definitely agree with you, because looking at the history of America, right? It's founded by Christopher Columbus and the Pilgrims, and these people are from Europe, and exactly where they get that ideology. Of course, they got it from the Eastern churches that was established from Paul throughout history. And same here in the Philippines, Dr. Rebecca. We think that Christianity is a Western concept also, but actually it came from Europe, and so on and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it actually completely debunks that idea that Christianity is really a Western concept.
If we look at the Bible itself, of course, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jewish man, sort of brown-skinned, a guy who lived in Palestine in modern day terms. Abraham, the first person sort of chosen by God to start his special people in the Old Testament, came from a place which in modern day terms is in Iraq. We see Africans in Abraham's family very early on, because Joseph, one of his grandsons, married an Egyptian woman. We see in the New Testament, Jesus breaking through every racial and cultural barrier of his day. We see the first Black Christian, the first African Christian that we know sort of individually in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 8, in the Ethiopian eunuch. We see on the day of Pentecost, which is like the birthday of the church, the day, day one when God's Spirit is poured out and the church starts. We see thousands of people from all sorts of different countries. It says from every country under heaven, and in their terms, becoming followers of Jesus then. So actually, Christianity doesn't belong to any one culture or any one language or any one place or any one people group. And at the end of the Bible and Revelation, we see people from every tribe and tongue and nation worshiping Jesus together. So that's what we're starting to see actually in the global church today. Right. As you and I are brother and sister across different time zones and different cultures and different racial and cultural backgrounds. But that's something that the Bible always told us that Christianity was going to do.
Yes, I completely agree with that, Dr. Rebecca. I mean, it's really fascinating that it really doesn't come from any culture. It always goes back and comes from Christ, the person of Christianity. And to add to that also, I believe he also broke the cultural barrier when he had a conversation with the Samaritan woman. And I think I remember reading that part in your book, and it was really make a lot of sense, and it entered my mind. Yeah, it's culturally speaking, Jesus just broke that barrier, and it united those diversities. And speaking of diversity, you mentioned diversity a while ago. This is the next question, because in the latter part of your book, you discuss on social. In terms of diversity, you emphasize that Christianity is the most diverse movement in all of history. Interesting. But in another chapter, you mentioned that about one faith. For the sake of the listeners, how can there be diversity in Christianity and still have one faith? How can you reconcile contradictions? Is this a contradiction? So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for us to understand today is that this word diversity is it's a word that we use a lot, but we use it to refer to very different kinds of things. So for example, you and I'm female and you're male. So that's diversity, there's a difference there. We speak different languages as our mother tongue. We live in different places. We have different racial backgrounds. We probably cook different foods. There are all sorts of ways in which there is sort of diversity between the two of us. And there are ways in which different people can think differently as well. So we've had this confusion for a long time, which says, okay, religion is basically an expression of culture. And so if you come from a certain place, you believe a certain thing. And so, for example, to say to somebody who comes from India, vastly majority Hindu country, to say that somebody from India needs to start following Jesus is a violation of their culture, because to be Indian is to be Hindu. And some religions will kind of almost make that claim, and I think that's some folks in India would say that those two, you can't separate out being Hindu from being Indian. The thing with Christianity is that actually Jesus claims that he is the Lord of the entire world. Right? The Bible tells us there is one God who made the universe in the first place, made all humans, whether they are black or white, whether they are Asian or African, whether they are European, wherever they come from, right? Sort of racially, that all of these people have been made by God in his image and in his likeness, the book of Genesis tells us. And Jesus, at the same time as breaking through all these cultural barriers, he said that all authority in heaven and on earth had been given to him. And he told his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. So Jesus's claim has, from the very first, been sort of offensively universal. There's no way, you can't look at Jesus and say, well, he's one God among many, or he's one good religious teacher, but we need to have him and all these other. Actually, you either have Jesus or you don't. He's either the universal resurrected king of the entire world, or he's a fraud. Those are the two options that we have. And if we think about it, if we say that, because somebody comes from India, or because somebody comes from a particular country, that they have a cultural background, if we say that they can't make up their own mind about what they believe, we're actually not being respectful to them. We're being disrespectful.
Yeah.
Because we're saying, you're not really a thinking person. You're just a product of your culture. Now, all of us are influenced by our culture, for sure. We're influenced by the family we come from, the place we grew up, the educational environments that we've lived in. But I think all of us would want to say, yeah, I actually choose what I most fundamentally believe. And I think, for example, a friend of mine, Praveen Sethupathi, whose parents immigrated from India, grew up in a Hindu family, became a Christian when he was an undergraduate, because a friend had challenged him, like, well, you say you're a Hindu, what does that really mean? So he started reading the Hindu scriptures, and he became very interested in the Hindu scriptures. But then he thought, well, I need to look at the other religions that are making big claims as well, because just because I'm ethnically from India doesn't mean I should only believe this one thing. And when he looked at Christianity, he started reading the Gospels, he found this really weird thing. He found the hero of Christianity, instead of being this, great and powerful God going around defeating other people, was this seemingly pathetic man dying on a cross. And that completely astonished him, because the one, and was one of the strange things about Christianity, the person who claims to be the king of the whole world died a shameful criminal's death and looked like he'd lost. And that is sort of staked at the heart of Christianity, this cross where the most powerful man who ever lived died the most sort of despised death ever to have been died. And that's the kind of power inversion that we see in Christianity.
That's a very powerful story. I mean, it's there in that book. Yeah, I remember reading that part. I'm happy for that Indian guy that he was able to, find Christ, and he even look at all religions, and he sees the all everything's connected to and centralized in Christ. So, yeah, I mean, these are one of the greatest takeaways, I would say. Going to the social issues now. In the latter part of your book, you discuss on the denigration of women and homophobia. So in this kind of post-truth culture, post-truth, you believe whatever you want to believe, you make your own culture. So how can a Christian in marriage, in social groups, and in universities, if let's say me as a student, how can we reach out to such a culture in the 21st century?
So many things in there.
Yes.
Just before I answer that, you mentioned doesn't Christianity denigrate women? One of the interesting things about Christianity is that it's always been a majority female movement, actually. So in the Greco-Roman world into which Christianity was born, it seems like the empire was as much as 2/3 male, because a lot of women died in childbirth, and a lot of baby girls were just left out to die. Women weren't valued as much as men at that time. And yet the early church, from what we can tell from sort of archaeological and historical records, seems to have been as much as 2/3 female. And we see that actually carrying through even to today. And we mentioned the church in China growing extremely fast. Majority female, probably more than 2/3 female, actually. So this idea that Christianity denigrates women, it misses the ways in which Jesus actually was the reason that we think that women should be equal to men in the first place. Because in the ancient world, really nobody thought that. So it was very much a Christian idea. And we look at the fact that the majority of Christians throughout history and throughout the world today are women. And we have to think, okay, what if instead of denigrating women, this is actually the greatest movement of and for women in all of history? And then we look at the questions around sexuality. And if we look historically and start with the early Christian movement in the first century, it's easy for us to think that there was this, there's always been this idea that there should be one man and one woman sort of faithfully married together, and that's kind of the default setting. And it's only been in the last few decades since, the sexual revolution in the 1960s, people have started to think outside of that. But actually, if we look at the first century, if we look at the Greco-Roman world that Christianity was born into again, men were not expected to be faithful to their wives. It was fine for them to sleep with other women. It was actually fine for them to sleep with other men as well. And the idea that a man should not only be faithful to one wife, but actually, as the Bible puts it, pour himself out in love for her. That husbands should love their wives as Jesus Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her on the cross. It's a completely crazy idea in the first century. People would have, like the Romans, would have laughed at that idea. And one of the strange distinctives of Christian sexual ethics was a kind of universal love, but a very specific space in which sex belonged. That was only a marriage between a man and a woman. And so one of the early commentators said, Christians they make really large tables to have lots of people around for a meal, but they only have like a very narrow bed just for the husband and wife to sleep together, right? So there's always been this sort of countercultural sexual ethic coming out of Christianity. And today it's very countercultural as well. I don't know as much about the context in the Philippines today, but certainly where I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the idea that of saying it's not okay for two men or two women to marry each other for Christians seems like immoral here. That seems like a kind of terrible and immoral thing to say. But actually, from a Christian perspective, the reason for that is because marriage has always been designed and intended by God from the very first to be a picture of his love for us, and that's a love across difference. So the Old Testament pictures it as God as a faithful husband, Israel is often an unfaithful wife. In the New Testament, Jesus says he's the bridegroom, and then the Apostle Paul says that Christian marriage is meant to be like a little scale model of Jesus' love for his church, and that's a love across difference. Now this, people sometimes say, well, you only think that because you want to. You're already homophobic, you're already sort of fearful and loathing of gay people. And so you've come to the Bible looking for that answer. Actually, I've always been more attracted to women than men. And if I were not a Christian, I'm pretty sure I'd be married to a woman today rather than to a man. That's just been my experience since childhood. And so if I had come to the Bible, I didn't come looking to see that marriage is only between a man and a woman. I would have been very happy to find that the Bible didn't really say that. As some people now will say, well, the Bible doesn't really say that for Christians, gay marriage is not an option. But actually, as I've read and understood more and more of the Bible, I've been more and more convinced that no, it really does say that. But again, I think that the final thing I want to say there is the mistake people sometimes say is then to say, okay, well, the Bible condemns same-sex love and relationships. And I want to say, no, actually, the Bible calls us to extraordinary, precious intimacy between Christians of the same sex. It calls us brothers and sisters. It calls us one body together. Paul called his friend Onesimus his very heart. I don't know if you could imagine saying that to one of your male friends, you're my very heart. There's this incredibly high calling of love between believers that the Bible gives us. But it's not a sexual love. Paul, who said marriage was so special, it was like meant to be a picture of Jesus' love for his church. He also said that singleness was even better. Not because he just wanted to be all by himself all the time, but actually he was able to serve Jesus in a whole complex web of loving relationships with other believers, most of them male, some female, sure, like a mix. But we need to, I think one of the ways that the church has often gone wrong is kind of acting like marriage is the only thing or the most important thing, and forgetting what the Bible says about the loving community that we should have between believers, not sexual, but deeply loving community.
So that's the reason why you end that social issue with that Jesus is our ultimate our lover. Basically, yeah. I think that's one of the things. And you also mentioned about I'm the resurrection, the life. I think it's always been Jesus as the focus, as the main foci for social and social context. And I like what you said there. I mean, it's very crucial that well, it depends. Actually, I think it depends on how people use the word same-sex marriage. Because I think it's socially speaking, it's like could be involvement of not actually social factors, but could be for reproduction. But actually, socially speaking, the Bible actually promotes what you said as there's a tie between same-sex as in the form of love, brotherly love, sisterly love.
Yeah, and it's not the two differences are, one, it's not sexual, and two, it's not exclusive. So I can have, and I do have, multiple really close female friends, and it's really important that that it's not like, oh, this is just my one female friend who I really, really love, and everyone else doesn't matter so much. Actually, that's not a very healthy, especially for somebody like me who's sort of predominantly attracted to women, that's not really a healthy way of going about life as a Christian. So whereas marriage is exclusive, I'm only meant to be having the relationship I have with my husband with one man. Friendship is actually designed to be a sort of non-exclusive thing, very, very close and loving. A little bit like parenting. I have 3 kids, and I love each of them very intensely, and I have a very special relationship with each of them. But I don't just love one and kind of forget the others. And people I know who have more than 3 children feel like your heart just kind of expands. You just grow extra love for the extra child, right? And that's how we, if we're Christians, that's how we should operate in friendship.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier also that you're really good in using literature to balance it. You use the one scene in Harry Potter, Severus Please, and with then you immediately jump to the last book, Deathly Hallows, wherein Harry was able to look at the what do you call it, that small teardrop
The memories
from
pensive, yeah.
Yeah, the pensive, right? And then he poured in the water, and then he saw everything. That's a brilliant, very brilliant illustration. I love it. I just wanna say it. So you viewers watching us, I really recommend. We recommend that book to you guys. Okay, so I think this is the last question already. On suffering. We're currently in the pandemic. So how can we find God in 2021? For the viewers and netizens who are watching us, what is your encouragement for them to find meaning this year?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's been really hard about the last year with the pandemic is the uncertainty, right? It wasn't, okay, everything's going to be locked down for 1 month and then it's all over. It was always like, well, there's going to be a lockdown now and it'll go on for some period of time, but we don't know. And we don't know if there's going to be a vaccine. We don't know how long this is going to take. We don't know how this is going to spread. We don't know if the virus is mutating. Really hard for us to live with that level of, we don't know how the story is unfolding. And in many ways, that's true of our lives, even beyond the pandemic. We don't know how the story is unfolding. Right now, I'm happily married with 3 delightful, healthy, happy children. Today, this afternoon, my husband could get run over by a bus, or I could be diagnosed with cancer. Like, we don't know, even at the happiest times of our lives, we don't know what's happening tomorrow, let alone what's happening next week or next month or next year. We think we do often, but we don't. The incredible thing about following Jesus, well, many incredible things, but one of the incredible things is saying, I actually know the person who's telling my story. I know the narrator. In Harry Potter terms, I know J.K. Rowling, and I know she's going to end things happy, right? Yeah. And even if we don't know what's happening next.
And by the way, I like what you said. J.K. Rowling is actually a Christian, if I'm right. If I'm right, just a button a little bit.
She did an interview a few years ago where she talked about how she sort of has a very fragile faith. She is saying, some days she believes, some days she doesn't. But she got the idea for the ending of Harry Potter very much from the Christian tradition. So she's certainly not writing as a kind of atheist or anti-Christian. But yeah, as Christians, as we're going through suffering, we may not understand why right now. Like, why is this particular thing happening to me right now? And the Bible doesn't promise us that we're going to understand that. But it does promise us that if we trust in Jesus, that one day he will wipe every tear from our eyes. We believe in the man who can call people out of the grave just with his words. We believe in someone who rose from the dead himself and promises us resurrection bodies one day with him. So no matter what happens in our lives today, we know that the ending, if we follow Jesus, is going to be incredibly happy. And conversely, if we're not following Jesus, if Jesus is who he says he is, and we have turned it and we've rejected his offer of mercy and forgiveness and the death that he died for us, however happy our lives are today, however happy our lives are for the next 50 years, one day we will die and we will face his judgment, and our eternity will be incredibly unhappy. So I think sometimes when I'm reading a book, really hard and painful things will happen to a character. Depending on the kind of book, I'll either know, well, this is the sort of book that's going to end happy, or this is the sort of book that's not. And if it's the kind of book that I know is going to end happy, I can have a hope for that character they can't have for themselves, because they don't know they're in the story. They don't know who's writing it. And similarly, as a Christian, I know that the person writing my story loves me enough to die for me, and loves you enough to die for you, and so has incredibly good intentions for your ending. From an atheist perspective, there is no story. There's no meaning to your suffering or mine. There's no actual meaning to you or me. We're just a random collection of atoms and molecules, here today, gone tomorrow. So, whereas for Christians, we know that the one who will end our story, and we know Jesus has been through every form of suffering that we could experience, and kind of meets us closely in that. If there is no God, our suffering has no meaning and it doesn't matter, and there's nobody to be with us in it.
Wow, that's a very touching ending. I mean, Jesus Christ had gone through all the suffering, and that actually bridged the gap between our suffering from his. That nothing compares his suffering to his suffering, and it's actually marvelous that he brought meaning to suffering through his death on the cross and him conquering the grave. Oh man, Dr. Rebecca, it's been a wonderful Q&A session. I want to hear your final thoughts, and how can the viewers keep in touch with you?
Yeah, well, it's been lovely to be with you as well. If people are on Twitter or Instagram, I'm on both of those platforms at Rebecca McLaughlin, I think. As you mentioned, I have a couple of books coming out in the next few months, The Secular Creed and 10 Questions Every Teen Should Ask. So if you have kids, or if you want to think more about some of the particular claims in the Secular Creed, I'm looking at the 5 claims: Black Lives Matter, Love is Love, Women's Right to Human Rights, the Gay Rights Movement is the new Civil Rights Movement, and Transgender Women for Women. So if you're interested in any of those kinds of ideas, that would be a hopefully useful book for you.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to those books. Hopefully in Logos or in Faith Life, it will be a free book of the month. I'm waiting for that. Yes. So thank you very much, Dr. Rebecca. Thank you very much, dear viewers, for keeping in touch with us. I hope
Thanks,
that this...
Take care, everyone.
Yes, I hope that I hope this Q&A is helpful for you guys. So please like and share our Facebook page, the Fellowship League, and also subscribe to our channel. God bless, and we'll see you next time.